at the end of a long day. What exhausts us most is not the work itself, but the sheer number of questions that never seem to find a place to rest. The modern mind is constantly stretched thin, pulled between speed information and invisible demands. We understand so many things, and yet we rarely feel truly at ease. Tonight, you do not need to search for answers. You only need to allow yourself to slow down. In physics, there is a problem so profound that it has made even the greatest minds pause and fall silent. The universe operates with astonishing precision, and yet its deepest laws refuse to fully agree with one another. There is an imperfection embedded right at the foundation of reality. And strangely enough, this mirrors the human condition. We too live by rules, roles, and reasons, yet somewhere within us there is always a slight misalignment, a quiet sense that things never quite fit together. This video is not a lecture. It is a slow journey where science, philosophy, and stillness gently meet. A place where questions are told in a low, soft voice so that you can listen without needing to understand. As Albert Einstein once said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. And perhaps as you let your mind drift with this story, you will come to realize that not every problem needs to be solved right now. Some only need to be set down so that sleep can begin. There are moments in life when everything has finally grown quiet enough, and we suddenly realize that our exhaustion does not come from what we have done, but from the feeling that everything is moving too fast. The modern human mind is accustomed to motion, to goals, to the need to understand, to grasp, to keep up. And yet we rarely allow ourselves to return to the point of beginning a place with no questions, no pressure, no names. Tonight, imagine that you are drifting very far away from the familiar days and months, far from this room, far from Earth, far even from the idea of a self, very far back to a time 4.6 billion years ago. There was no sun yet, no planets, no morning light to wake anything, and no night to lull anything to sleep. There was only a nebula, a vast, cold, dark cloud drifting silently through space. Inside it were dust, gas, and raw elements, no clear shape, no center, no purpose, and no one watching. Yet, within this seemingly undefined state, everything had already begun. The nebula did not hurry. It did not decide to become a star. It simply existed long enough, quietly enough, steadily enough for gravity to do its work. Tiny grains of dust began to drift toward one another, not for a reason, not according to a plan, simply because that is how nature moves, slowly, patiently, without effort. And then at some point, very small, very deep, a center formed, not because the nebula wanted to shine, but because it had gathered enough that it could no longer remain silent. A star was about to be born. When we hear about the birth of the sun, we often think of numbers, equations, physical forces. But if we listen to this story in the rhythm of the night, we may notice something else entirely. The beginning of matter is not dramatic. It is accepting. The nebula did not resist its own collapse. It did not fear becoming something else. It allowed the process to unfold naturally without force. And in that very letting go, a source of light emerged. Not a light meant to illuminate anyone, just a light that simply exists. Human beings, at a very deep level, are much like that nebula. We accumulate experiences, memories, anxieties, hopes, disappointments. Each passing day, a little more fine dust settles into the mind. And then one day, we feel heavy, not knowing why, not knowing since when, only sensing that something inside wants to change its state. Yet instead of allowing that process to happen, we often try to control it. We ask too soon. We demand answers while things are still forming. We want light before there is enough mass for it to ignite on its own. Philosophy, when spoken slowly, is not an attempt to explain the universe. It is a reminder that every birth requires time, and that not every phase needs to be understood immediately. As Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The nebula was not afraid of its own darkness, and perhaps human beings do not need to push out of the dim regions of the mind either, for it is there that new centers form. There that questions begin to gain weight, and one day, without announcement, a source of light stable enough will appear. Not the light of achievement, not the light of victory, but the light of understanding that one does not need to become someone else. As you lie here listening to this story, you do not need to picture what the nebula looked like. Just feel its slow rhythm. A rhythm without clocks, without goals. Only the gentle gathering of what has been scattered for far too long. And if there is something within you that feels unclear, unsolid, not yet bright, remember this. Even the sun was once a dark cloud, drifting without direction, without a name. Not every beginning is radiant, but every light begins by allowing itself to remain still long enough in the dark. For now, you do not need to go anywhere. Just stay here a little longer, like the nebula once did. After passing through the story of the fragile balance at the heart of a star, we may begin to sense something quietly reassuring. The universe does not operate through chaos. Even in moments of collapse or transition, there is a silent order holding everything in place. And yet, if we listen more deeply, we discover that behind all of this balance, only a very small number of principles are at work. So simple they almost feel unbelievable. everything we observe from the motion pan of galaxies, the light of distant stars, the rhythm of the heart within your chest, to the cohesion of each atom in your body, can be traced back to four fundamental forces: no more, no less: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong force, the weak force. Four forces, four ways in which reality quietly speaks to itself. Seen from far away, gravity is the easiest force to recognize. It is slow, subtle. It does not need contact. It draws galaxies toward one another, keeps planets in their orbits, and allows you right now to be supported by the ground beneath you. Gravity never rushes. It does not need intensity to exist. It only needs patience. Perhaps that is why humans often associate gravity with something deeply familiar: attachment. The things that pull us home, the bonds that require no explanation, the memories that still carry weight even when they feel very far away. Albert Einstein once wrote, "In the world as I see it, gravity explains the motions of the planets, but it cannot explain who sets the planets in motion." As if even gravity, the most fundamental force, is only part of a much larger story. A little closer in the world, you can touch and see. Electromagnetism begins to speak. It is the reason light exists, the reason atoms bind into molecules, the reason nerves carry signals, devices glow, and thoughts can form inside your brain. Electromagnetism both attracts and repels. It binds and it separates. It carries a livelier rhythm than gravity, one that feels closer to human emotion, deeper still beyond the reach of ordinary sight. The strong force and the weak force work in silence. The strong force is what holds particles together inside the atomic nucleus. It is the glue of matter. Without it, there would be no atoms, no you, no story unfolding here at all. The weak force, despite its modest name, is responsible for change. It allows particles to transform, permits radioactive decay, enables stars to burn their fuel and shine. If the strong force keeps things in place, the weak force ensures that nothing remains frozen forever, holding and changing, stability and transformation. The four forces do not argue. They do not try to prove which one matters more. They simply operate within their own domains, with their own strengths, exactly where they are needed. And from this quiet cooperation, all phenomena emerge. A flower blooming, a star igniting, a body aging, a thought forming, then dissolving. Each is a different expression of the same underlying foundation. We often assume the world must be too complex to be simple. But physics whispers the opposite. The deepest layer of reality is remarkably economical. Few principles, few forces, few assumptions, and from them infinite forms arise. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, "The world is the totality of facts, not of things." Perhaps those facts are simply moments when the four forces intersect in a particular configuration. And when that configuration changes, another fact appears. Seen this way, there is a gentle comfort to be found. Your life, with its movements, collisions, attachments, and dissolutions, is not a random sequence. It is the result of very ancient forces passing through you, just as they have passed through stars for billions of years. When you feel pulled in a certain direction, that may be gravity. When you feel pushed away, overstimulated, or suddenly illuminated, that may be electromagnetism. When you struggle to keep something from breaking, that may be the strong force. And when you find yourself changing despite resistance, that may be the weak force quietly at work. No force is wrong. No force is an enemy. Difficulty arises only when we believe we must fight them rather than listen. At night, when the outer world has slowed, you can allow yourself to sense a deeper rhythm of reality, one that needs no analysis, no understanding. Only the recognition that you are being held by the same principles that have kept this universe in existence. You do not need to do anything to deserve that. You have been within this flow from the very beginning. And as this story drifts through your mind, let those forces continue their work silently, precisely, without your intervention, just as the universe always has. After moving through the story of the fragile balance at the heart of a star, we may begin to feel something quietly certain. The universe does not run on chaos. Even in moments of collapse or transition, there is a silent order holding everything in place. And yet, if we listen more deeply, we discover that behind every balance, only a very small number of principles are at work, so simple they almost feel unbelievable. Everything we observe, from the motion of galaxies, the light of stars, the rhythm of the heart in your chest, to the cohesion of every atom in your body, can be traced back to four fundamental forces. No more, no less. Gravity, electromagnetism, the strong force, the weak force. Four forces in which reality quietly whispers to itself. Seen from very far away, gravity is the easiest force to notice. It is slow, silent. It does not need to touch. It draws galaxies toward one another, keeps planets in their orbits, and allows you right now to be held by the ground beneath you. Gravity does not hurry. It does not require great intensity to exist. It only requires patience. Perhaps that is why humans often associate gravity with something deeply familiar: attachment. The things that pull us home, connections that need no explanation, memories that still carry weight, even when they are very far away. Albert Einstein once wrote in "The World as I See It," gravity explains the motions of the planets, but it cannot explain who sets the planets in motion. As if even gravity, the most fundamental force, is only one part of a much larger story. A little closer in the world you can touch and see. Electromagnetism begins to speak. It is the reason light exists, the reason atoms bond into molecules, the reason nerves transmit signals, devices glow, and thoughts can form within your brain. Electromagnetism both attracts and repels. It binds and it separates. It carries a livelier rhythm than gravity, something closer to human emotion, deeper still beyond the reach of ordinary sight. The strong force and the weak force work quietly. The strong force is what keeps particles inside the atomic nucleus from flying apart. It is the glue of matter. Without it, there would be no atoms, no you, no story being told here at all. The weak force, despite its modest name, is responsible for change. It allows particles to transform, permits radioactive decay, enables stars to burn their fuel and shine. If the strong force keeps things in place, the weak force ensures that nothing remains still forever, holding and changing, stability and transformation. The four forces do not argue. They do not try to prove themselves more important than one another. They simply operate within their own domains, with their own strengths exactly where they are needed. And from that quiet cooperation, all phenomena arise. A flower blooming, a star igniting, a body aging, a thought forming and dissolving. All of these are different expressions of the same underlying foundation. We often assume the world must be too complex to be simple, but physics whispers the opposite. The deepest layer of reality is remarkably economical. Few principles, few forces, few assumptions, and from them infinite forms emerge. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, "The world is the totality of facts, not of things." Perhaps those facts are simply moments when the four forces intersect in a particular configuration. And the moment that configuration changes, another fact appears. Seen this way, there is a very gentle kind of comfort. Your life, with its movements, collisions, attachments, and dissolutions, is not a random sequence. It is the result of ancient forces passing through you, just as they have passed through stars for billions of years. When you feel pulled in a certain direction that may be gravity, when you feel pushed away, overstimulated, or suddenly illuminated, that may be electromagnetism. When you try to keep something from breaking, that may be the strong force. And when you find yourself changing even when you resist it, that may be the weak force quietly whispering, "No force is wrong. No force is an enemy." Difficulty arises only when we believe we must fight them instead of listening. At night, when all outer movement has slowed, you can allow yourself to feel the deeper rhythm of reality, a rhythm that needs no analysis, no understanding, only the recognition that you are being held by the same principles that have kept this universe in existence. You do not need to do anything to deserve that. You have been within this current from the very beginning, and as you let this story drift through your mind, allow those forces to continue their work quietly, precisely, without your intervention, just as the universe always has. After listening to the deep breathing of the fundamental forces, those silent principles that uphold all phenomena, the story of the universe slowly turns toward the human being, not as a creature standing outside to observe, but as a point of intersection where those forces begin to be understood and then transformed into action. And it is precisely here that the great revolutions of human civilization have unfolded quietly without announcement, yet powerful enough to redirect the entire flow of history. No scientific revolution begins with power or ambition. It begins with a very small shift in perception. A moment when someone dares to think that the world might operate differently from what we have long believed. In the 17th century, when Newton saw the motions of celestial bodies and earthly objects as expressions of the same law, he offered humanity a peculiar gift, the belief that the world could be predicted. Mechanics was not merely mathematics. It was a feeling of safety, the sense that if we understood the forces clearly enough, we could build machines, cities, and even systems more stable than our own emotions. Newton once wrote in a letter to Robert Hooke, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." What is less often mentioned is that this very sensation of standing on shoulders opened the age of gears, levers, and controlled motion, a world in which humans believed they could master matter. But the world does not operate by motion alone. It also vibrates. When Faraday and later Maxwell touched the nature of electricity and magnetism, they did not merely invent technology. They awakened distance itself. For the first time, humans could transmit signals across space without a visible material medium. Light became a wave. Space became a field. Faraday once said, "Nothing is too wonderful to be true if it be consistent with the laws of nature." And from that moment on, darkness was torn open by electric light. Cities awoke at night. Humans began speaking to one another across great distances. Yet at the same time, something else emerged: overload. When information moves faster than the heartbeat, the mind begins to tire. Then came Einstein, not adding a new force, but reshaping how we understand time and space themselves. When he revealed that energy and mass could transform into one another, he did more than explain why the sun shines. He handed humanity a dangerous power, the ability to release energy imprisoned within matter. Einstein wrote in "The World as I See It," the unleashed power of the atom has changed everything, save our modes of thinking. And indeed, the nucleus brought not only light, but shadow. Progress now arrived, hand in hand with ethical responsibility, something science alone could not resolve. Humanity began to realize that understanding the universe does not automatically mean understanding how to live within it. The next revolution, quantum mechanics, unfolded more quietly, yet its influence seeped into every moment of modern life. Quantum theory does not offer certainty. It offers probability. It tells us that at the deepest level, reality does not obey everyday intuition, that the observer and the observed cannot be separated. Werner Heisenberg wrote in Physics and Philosophy, "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." From the uncertainty principle arose the high-tech world, computers, lasers, the internet, artificial intelligence. But alongside this power came a new fragility, when everything can shift because of the smallest fluctuation. And now, as you lie here listening to this story, in the night, you may sense it too. Humanity has traveled very far in what it can do, yet is still learning how to remain still. Scientific revolutions are not wrong. They reflect an ancient need to understand in order to survive. But when we listen at a slower rhythm, we may notice that each revolution is also a reminder. Every new layer of understanding demands a new layer of awareness. From gears to electromagnetic waves, from energy to probability, human beings gain increasing control over the outer world, yet more easily lose sync with the inner one. And perhaps the reason you come to stories like this at night is not to learn something more, but to allow yourself to step out of the orbit of progress for a moment and return to a slower rhythm, a place with no need to invent, no need to prove, only to listen. For even in a universe built by revolutions, peace has always begun with the act of stopping. After the revolutions that shook the way humans act upon the world, another current, quieter, yet more enduring, has continued to flow beneath the surface. The dream of unity. Not unity for the sake of control, but for understanding. Not to dominate, but to gather everything back to a shared ground where differences can coexist without conflict. That dream began very early in ancient Greece before electric light, when the night sky was still whole. With darkness and stars, people looked upward and asked, what is reality made of? Aristotle spoke of the 4 elements: earth, water, air, fire, not as crude substances, but as qualities, hot and cold, dry and wet. A gentle attempt to hold a complex world within a framework that could be breathed. Alongside that simplicity, another idea quietly took root: the atom. Democritus whispered that everything could be divided until it could no longer be divided any further. Not to dismantle the world, but to find its final unit. Though these paths were different, they shared the same longing. Could everything be reduced to a small number of principles? Centuries passed. The 4 elements dissolved under modern chemistry. The atom opened inward into smaller particles. Yet the dream did not dissolve. It merely changed language. As science advanced, the dream of unification grew more precise and heavier. No longer images, but equations. No longer substances, but relationships. Humanity began to believe that if the right system of equations could be written, we would not only describe the universe, but touch its deepest structure. Albert Einstein carried this dream further than anyone of his time. After reshaping the world with relativity, he did not stop. He returned to an old ancient question: why do forces exist as separate entities? Why is gravity different from electromagnetism? Why is the world not simpler? Einstein believed this fragmentation was temporary. He believed that at a deeper level, forces were merely different expressions of a unified principle, and he devoted much of his remaining life to what he called a unified field theory. Einstein once wrote in a letter to Max Born, "I want to know how God created this world. I am not interested in this or that phenomenon. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details." Not everyone agreed with him. As quantum physics advanced, many colleagues felt Einstein was moving against the current. What they did not always recognize was this: Einstein was not resisting complexity. He simply did not believe that the deepest layer of reality was chaotic. The dream of a theory of everything, a framework that could gather all forces, particles, and interactions into one, is not merely a scientific ambition. It is profoundly human, a deep psychological need to live in a world that can be understood as a whole. Philosophy recognized this tendency long ago. Spinoza in Ethics wrote of a single reality where everything is merely a different expression of the same substance. Without equations, he touched the same intuition. Separation is surface, not essence. Perhaps that is why the dream of unity does not live only in laboratories. It lives within each person when they grow tired of their own fragmentation, when they ask whether inner contradictions, reason and emotion, freedom and responsibility, desire and fear might belong to a deeper structure. Carl Jung once wrote, in Modern Man, in Search of a Soul, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." Perhaps unity is not the resolution of all contradictions, but the capacity to grow large enough to contain them within the same inner space, like an equation wide enough to hold terms of opposite sign. As you lie here listening, you do not need to believe that humanity will soon discover a theory of everything. Science may take a very long time, or it may move in a direction entirely unforeseen. But the dream itself, the sense that reality is not meaningless, that differences can return to a shared ground, remains gently valuable. For within that dream, we learn to connect rather than divide, to find a shared rhythm among opposing forces, and to remain with a question instead of forcing it into an answer. Tonight, you do not need a universal equation, only a light feeling that everything, however fragmented, may still belong to a larger story. And sometimes that feeling alone is not enough to let the mind rest. After the dream of unity, the human longing to gather the world back into a shared foundation, tonight's story slows by another gentle beat, turning toward two names that reshaped how we see the universe, Galileo and Newton. Not as distant monuments of history, but as two human beings who dared to believe that nature does not speak in opinions, but in laws, and that those laws can be heard if one is patient enough. Galileo began with a gesture of quiet humility, looking. He looked at the sky through a crude telescope, at the moon's imperfect surface, at moons circling Jupiter, and within what he saw there was a subtle liberation. The heavens were no longer a sacred realm beyond reach, but part of the same world as the stone falling at our feet. The divide between sky and earth began to dissolve. What Galileo offered was not only data, but a method. He believed that nature answers when we ask through experiment, not when we impose through doctrine. He wrote in Il Saggiatore, "Philosophy is written in this grand book, the universe, which stands continually open to our gaze. It is written in the language of mathematics." That language was not meant to impress. It was a way to reduce noise so that we would not mistake the echo of our own beliefs for the whisper of the world. Then came Newton as a natural continuation of that way of seeing. If Galileo taught us how to ask Newton, taught us how to connect. He connected the falling apple to the orbit of the moon. He connected the distant sky to the ground beneath our feet, and from that connection emerged universal gravitation, not as a miracle, but as a simple statement, the same law everywhere. Newton wrote, "In principia I frame no hypotheses." He did not need metaphysical speculation to fill the gaps. He let the equations stand firm enough, calm enough, and allowed the world to speak through them. And strangely, the world agreed. Planetary orbits followed those numbers. Motion became predictable. Order appeared not through force, but through fit. Yet true order is always tested. In the 19th century, astronomers noticed something very small, almost imperceptible. Uranus deviated from its orbit, not dramatically, not loudly, just a subtle misalignment enough to make those who trusted Newton pause. There were two possibilities. Either the law was wrong, or something had not yet been seen. They chose the second, a profoundly humble choice. Instead of abandoning the law, they allowed it to guide them. Through mathematics, they inferred the existence of an unseen planet. And when telescopes were turned to the precise place the equations indicated, Neptune appeared like a quiet whisper. The theory had listened correctly. It was a rare moment when abstract thought and direct observation met in silence. No argument, no noisy triumph. Only a gentle confirmation that when we are patient with laws, the world can reveal itself. In inner life, such moments exist as well. There are small misalignments within us, a sense of things not quite fitting, a nameless fatigue. We may rush to conclude that we are wrong, that everything needs replacing. But there is another possibility. Something has not yet been seen. An inner Neptune quietly tugging at the orbit, waiting to be recognized. David Hume wrote in an inquiry concerning human understanding, custom is the great guide of human life. But Galileo and Newton remind us that when habit blinds us, slow observation can restore clarity to perception, not to judge, but to understand. At its deepest level, science is not conquest. It is a disciplined art of listening. And the quiet victory of theory and observation from Uranus to Neptune was not humanity's triumph over the universe, but humility's triumph before what had not yet been seen. As you lie here, listening in the night, let your breath slow like the turning of planets. Allow yourself to trust that if something within you feels out of sync, you do not need to fix it immediately. Perhaps all that is needed is to look a little longer, to ask more gently, and to give the deeper law your own time to speak. For the universe operates by shared laws, not to force us into sameness, but to remind us that lasting order is born from honest listening. And within that listening, even sleep can become a form of understanding, wordless, effortless, and deeply calm. After the quiet moment when theory and observation found one another, as Neptune appeared exactly where the numbers had whispered, the stream of thought tonight continues to drift softer, deeper into an unseen realm, a place where objects no longer need to touch in order to affect one another, where distance is no longer a barrier, and where light is not merely something we see, but something we are already living within. Michael Faraday began with a remarkably simple intuition. He watched iron filings arrange themselves around a magnet and sensed that something was present in space itself, even though it could not be grasped. Not force as an instant push or pull, but a field, a subtle ordering of possibility spread everywhere, waiting to be activated. Faraday did not have many equations. He had sketches, curves, spirals. He believed space was not empty. It was woven from invisible relationships. And when a charge or a magnet appeared, those relationships rearranged themselves, propagated, and influenced what followed. The idea of a field may sound technical, but when listened to slowly, it carries a quiet comfort. We are never truly suspended in nothingness. There is always a supporting context, an unseen ground in which every movement takes place. James Clerk Maxwell came later as someone able to translate intuition into precise language. He gathered Faraday's visions into elegant equations, and within that elegance, something astonishing emerged. Electricity and magnetism were not separate phenomena. They were two faces of the same force, continuously transforming into one another through motion. When an electric field changes, a magnetic field appears. When a magnetic field changes, an electric field responds. This chain of response needs no material carrier. It propagates through space itself like a wave. Maxwell looked into the numbers and recognized the speed of that wave. It matched the speed of light. Light, it turned out, needed no medium to travel through. It was the oscillation of electric and magnetic fields, self-supporting, self-sustaining. Light was a field in motion. The moment was quiet, yet it changed how we understand the world. If light is an electromagnetic wave, then vision is no longer a matter of seeing objects, but of interacting with an invisible structure that fills space. We do not merely see light, we exist within it. Many years later, Albert Einstein captured the spirit of this realization in a single sentence during his 1920 lecture in Leiden. The field is the sole governing agency of the particle, no longer particles as tiny billiard balls colliding in a vacuum, no longer forces as distant touches, only fields, continuous foundations in which particles are temporary ripples. If we allow that thought to settle, it opens a very different feeling about ourselves. Perhaps we are not separate entities colliding in emptiness. Perhaps we are small oscillations within a much larger field, a field of emotion, of memory, of relationship, of history. Electricity and magnetism, attraction and repulsion resemble familiar states of the mind. When we hold on, when we let go, when we connect, when we withdraw. No state exists alone. They transform into one another, depending on movement, depending on rhythm. Philosophy sensed this long ago. Spinoza spoke of a single reality where all things are merely different expressions of the same substance. He had no Maxwell equations, but he carried the same intuition to vision as surface, not essence. As you lie here, listening in the night, you may begin to feel these invisible fields around you, not with your eyes, but with your body, the gentle presence of air, a warmth in the chest, a wave of thought arriving and departing without needing to be held. You do not need to name any of it. Just notice that you are being supported by things that do not need to be seen. The light outside continues to propagate even when your eyes are closed. Fields continue to vibrate even when you are not thinking about them. And electricity and magnetism continue their quiet conversation, keeping this world connected. In this slow rhythm of telling boundaries, begin to soften between matter and space, between inside and outside, between you and the story. And perhaps it is precisely within that softness that sleep arrives, not as a shutting down, but as a very gentle wave, where you allow yourself to dissolve into the unseen field that holds everything. No need to understand more, no need to try. Just remain there a little longer within the light that cannot be seen yet is always present. After touching the invisible fields where electricity and magnetism quietly converse, tonight's story drifts toward a strange threshold, a place where time no longer stands still as we once believed. Here, familiar rhythms begin to soften. The clock is no longer the absolute ruler, and light, something we once thought existed only to be seen, becomes the deepest standard of reality. Albert Einstein did not begin with the ambition to break time apart. He began with a childlike question: what would happen if we chased a beam of light? In Newton's world, the answer seemed obvious. If we ran fast enough, we would catch up. But Maxwell had planted a small contradiction. Light always moves at the same speed, no matter who measures it, where it is measured, or how the observer is moving. Einstein listened to that contradiction for a long time, and then he accepted a bold conclusion. It is not light that changes to accommodate us. It is space and time that must bend to keep light unchanged. From that moment on, time was no longer a single river flowing equally for everyone. It became an experience dependent on motion. When you move faster, your time flows more slowly. When you remain still, your time unfolds differently. There is no absolute now, only overlapping nows woven together by different life trajectories. Einstein wrote in a letter to Michel Besso in 1955, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. If that sentence is allowed to settle into the night, it can bring a strange sense of relief. Perhaps what has passed has not truly vanished, and what is yet to come is not necessarily rushing toward us. They are simply existing at different rhythms from different perspectives of the same reality. When light cannot be overtaken, it becomes a soft boundary of the world, not a wall, but a standard. Everything else, distance, length, time, must adjust to honor that limit. Space contracts along the direction of motion. Time slows, and all measurements become relative. In inner life, we know moments like this too. Some days pass in an instant. Some nights stretch endlessly, not because the clock has changed, but because our inner state has shifted. Einstein simply gave that intuition a scientific structure. Time is not a fixed foundation. It is a relationship. Then came a short equation, very short, yet heavy as a confession. E equals mc2. Energy and mass are not distant entities. They are two ways of speaking about the same thing. Mass can become energy. Energy can carry mass. Matter is no longer solid. It is energy compressed very tightly. At the heart of the sun, that equation whispers every second. Hydrogen nuclei merge, and a fraction of mass transforms into energy, radiating outward as light and heat. The sun does not burn itself in the ordinary sense. It transforms, and from that transformation, Earth is warmed. Life has time to emerge, and you are given a night to lie still and listen. Einstein once wrote, "In the world as I see it, the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious." Perhaps the beauty of this equation lies not in its power, but in its gentleness. Matter is not closed. It can dissolve into light, and light in turn can touch the eyes, the skin, biological rhythms, and then become memory. If mass can become energy, then what feels heavy within us can also change state, not disappear, but transform. Fatigue can soften into stillness. Tension can ease into release. All that is needed is the right condition, like the core of a star, where pressure and temperature are sufficient to open the door to a phase change. As you listen to these stories in the night, notice this. No one is chasing you to catch up with light. No one is asking you to run faster than time, because your time is your own. It flows along your life's trajectory, your emotional velocity, the way you are present. In this moment, as the narration slows, you may allow the inner space to expand. Allow time to become gentler. No measuring, no comparing, just being here with light that left the sun 8 minutes ago touching you at precisely this moment. No one catches up to light, yet light always finds its way. And perhaps in the same way, peace does not need to be pursued. It only needs to be allowed to come closer. After sensing time soften under Einstein's light, tonight's current carries us to a quieter place, and yet a more tense one. Not because the universe is too chaotic, but because it is upheld by two immense pillars that cannot stand together within the same space. One pillar looks outward to the vast universe. The other looks inward to the infinitely small. Both are true. Both are extraordinarily precise. And precisely because of that, they cannot be reconciled. Einstein's general relativity tells the story of space and time as a supple fabric. Planets, stars, and galaxies are not pulled by gravity in the ordinary sense. They simply follow the curves that matter and energy carve into space-time. At this scale, everything flows slowly, smoothly, continuously. There are no jumps, no randomness, only deep geometry and necessity. Quantum mechanics, by contrast, tells an entirely different story. Here, the world is not continuous, but discrete. Energy appears in packets. Particles have no definite position until they are measured. Probability replaces certainty, and reality at its deepest level speaks not in gentle curves, but in restless fluctuations. One side is necessity, the other is probability. One is continuous, the other is discontinuous. For much of modern history, humanity lived comfortably by keeping these two worlds apart. When speaking of galaxies, we used general relativity. When speaking of atoms, we used quantum theory. Each pillar did its work. Each story was complete within its own domain. But the universe is not always so polite. There are places where the two worlds are forced to meet. The Big Bang is one of them. In that primordial moment, the entire universe, with its immense mass, was compressed into an extraordinarily small region, very large and very small at once. General relativity says space-time curves without limit. Quantum theory says fluctuations become uncontrollable. When both languages are spoken together, the equations fracture. Black holes are another such place. Matter collapses into a point where density and curvature exceed every boundary. Outside general relativity works flawlessly. Inside, quantum effects cannot be ignored. And at that boundary, our theories fall silent, not because of missing data, but because there is no shared language left. Albert Einstein once wrote, "The most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious living philosophies." 1931. Perhaps the beauty here lies not in a solution, but in the courage to acknowledge incompatibility, to look directly at a contradiction that cannot be patched over for convenience. In our inner lives, we carry such pillars as well. One part of us longs for order, causality, a coherent narrative. Another part lives through intuition, emotion impulses that resist explanation. We often try to choose one side to live too rationally or too emotionally. Yet, the deepest exhaustion does not come from being wrong, but from demanding harmony where no bridge yet exists. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote, "Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced." Perhaps general relativity and quantum mechanics do not need to be reconciled just yet. Perhaps the Big Bang and black holes are not failures of science, but gentle reminders that human understanding is still growing. Like a person who cannot yet fully reconcile past and future, control and surrender, certainty and ambiguity. As you lie here listening, notice this. You do not need to resolve every contradiction within yourself before you are allowed to rest. The universe has not done so either, and still it continues to exist, vast, resilient, patient. Some things become clear only when we stop forcing them to be clear. Some pillars cannot stand together, not because they are wrong, but because they are waiting for a deeper level of understanding that has not yet arrived. Tonight, you may allow the two worlds within you to coexist. No reconciliation required, no conclusion demanded. Just rest in the space between, not the Big Bang, not the black hole, but a slow human breath. And within that breath, contradiction is no longer a burden. It is simply a sign that you are living in a universe that does not need to be perfect in order to be gentle. After standing at the boundary where the two pillars of physics cannot be reconciled, tonight's current gently lowers its altitude, descending into realms unimaginably small, where reality is no longer woven from curved space-time or abstract probabilities, but from particles so tiny and fragile that a deviation of the slightest kind would mean nothing could ever appear at all. At this deep layer, the world is not built from stone or light, but from quarks, particles so fundamental they cannot be divided further, combining into protons and neutrons, the cores of every atom. Alongside them are electrons quietly orbiting, forming the structures we call matter. Threaded through this picture are neutrinos, near ghosts that barely interact, passing through your body right now. Billions of them each second, leaving no trace behind. And always on the opposite side, there is antimatter symmetric counterparts, carrying opposite charge, ready to annihilate upon contact with ordinary matter. Their existence reminds us that the universe has no obligation to choose a side. It requires only a very slight imbalance to favor one form of existence over another. Without that imbalance, matter and antimatter would have erased each other at the very beginning, and tonight there would be no one left to listen. These particles do not arise randomly. They are arranged into three families like three sedimentary layers of reality. Each family carries the same structural pattern, but grows heavier, less stable. The first family forms the familiar world. The second and third appear only under extreme conditions, then vanish quickly like whispers, suggesting that the universe holds far more possibilities than the ones it keeps. The question that refuses to fall silent here is simple and profound. Why three? Why not one or four? Why do masses and charges take such precise values, so precise that a minute change would render atoms unstable, stars unable to burn, chemistry impossible? If the strong force were slightly weaker, particles inside nuclei would not bind. If electromagnetism were slightly stronger, protons would repel one another so violently that no heavy atoms could exist. If the electron were a little heavier, it would collapse into the proton, turning hydrogen, the foundation of stars, into something that never was. From this vantage point, life is not inevitable. It is the fragile outcome of an extraordinarily precise tuning, and that fragility carries a strange feeling, not pride, but humility. Carl Sagan once wrote in Cosmos, "The universe is a very big place. If it's just us, seems like an awful waste of space, but perhaps the waste is not in space. It lies in forgetting that with even the slightest deviation, there would be no one left to nip it a waste. No eyes to see, no mind to ask. At the microscopic level, everything exists on an edge, holding and releasing, persisting and dissolving, a balance as thin as a filament, yet strong enough to support the entire vast universe above it. The stability of particles does not come from force, but from precision. In inner life, we live by such tuning as well. Let a breath slip slightly out of rhythm, and the mind tightens. Let a thought repeat just a little too long, and sleep disappears. Let a memory weigh slightly more than usual, and the whole day shifts. We often think we need to sweep change, yet sometimes what is needed is only a very small adjustment, just enough for the inner structure to become stable again. Blaise Pascal wrote in Pensées is but a reed, the most feeble thing in nature, but he is a thinking reed. Perhaps human strength does not lie in enduring immense forces, but in maintaining balance within a finely tuned world, a world that can collapse if rushed and continue if listened to patiently enough. As you lie here letting these words drift slowly through your mind, remember this. You do not need to carry the universe. The particles are doing their work. The forces are holding their proper strength. And life, fragile yet resilient, has found a way to appear tonight. You may allow yourself to be tuned in the same way, not through effort, but through gentle release. A little less tension, a little less insistence, just as the universe once did long before you were here. After passing through the fragile world of particles, where even the slightest deviation could prevent stars from burning and life from ever arriving to night's current, settles even further, touching an idea more daring still. Here, physics whispers that perhaps fundamental particles are not rigid, invisible points after all. Perhaps, at the deepest level, reality is not built from bricks, but from exceedingly small vibrations. String theory begins with a quiet unease. When we try to weave general relativity with its smooth space-time into quantum mechanics with its restless uncertainty, the equations blow up, becoming infinite and chaotic, as if we were trying to describe the ocean using scattered grains of sand. There is something too sharp, too rigid in imagining particles as dimensionless points. And then another image appears. If particles are not points, but infinitesimal strings, collisions no longer occur at a single location. They are spread out through space, softening the violence of interaction. Not because the world becomes vaguer, but because it becomes gentler. These strings are unimaginably small, at the Planck scale, where distance is no longer measured in meters or atoms, but in numbers that exhaust the imagination. And precisely because they are so small, they cannot remain still. They vibrate. And each mode of vibration corresponds to what we call a particle. A different vibration, a different mass, a different rhythm, a different charge. Photon, electron, quark, no longer distinct substances, but different melodies played on the same kind of string. There is a quiet beauty in this idea. No longer must we ask why the world contains so many different particles. Perhaps, as in music, diversity does not arise from material, but from rhythm. Einstein once expressed his discomfort with quantum randomness in a famous line from a 1926 letter to Max Born: God does not play dice with the universe. String theory does not deny uncertainty, but it suggests that beneath that uncertainty, there may exist a deeper structure, one in which order and vibration coexist without canceling each other out. More striking still, among the possible modes of vibration, appears a very special one corresponding to the graviton, the carrier of gravity. This has made many physicists fall silent. For gravity, the force that has refused to enter the quantum world for nearly a century, seems to arise naturally the moment we allow particles to be strings. No forcing, no external addition. Gravity simply appears. Perhaps the conflict between general relativity and quantum mechanics exists not because either is wrong, but because we have been questioning them with an image that is not yet soft enough. When points become strings, conflict eases. Space-time becomes less harsh. Divergences become less infinite. In inner life, we encounter similar conflicts. When we see ourselves as points rigid, fixed, needing to be right, every collision hurts. But when we allow ourselves to be, processes, sequences of vibrations adjusting their rhythm to circumstance, contradiction no longer destroys. It transforms. Eastern philosophy has long spoken in this language, not objects, but flow, not fixed essence, but impermanence. String theory in a deeply scientific way is simply saying the same thing through refined mathematics. Existence is vibration. As you lie here listening, notice your breath. It does not stand still, it oscillates softly. Your heartbeat does the same. So do your thoughts. You do not need to be a perfect point tonight. You only need to vibrate in the right rhythm, slower, deeper, gentler. If the universe, at its deepest level, is a symphony of strings, then peace is not absolute silence. It is a stable harmony where no vibration overwhelms another. String theory has not yet been fully verified. It remains more promise than conclusion, but sometimes a promise placed gently is enough for the mind to release its tension enough to feel that not every contradiction needs to be resolved immediately. Some only need to be held within a wider frame. Tonight, you may allow yourself not to be an answer, just a very small, very human vibration within a universe that has been vibrating for a very long time. And within that vibration, sleep does not arrive as an extinguishing, but as a low, gentle note sustained just long enough for you to rest. After listening to the faint vibrations where strings whisper about mass and force, tonight's journey reaches the outermost edge of scientific imagination, a place where the question is no longer what, but where. Here, the universe is no longer confined to the three familiar dimensions. It quietly opens into hidden ones, folded, curled, layered upon themselves, existing without demanding to be seen. String theory in its search for internal consistency whispers something almost unbelievable. The world requires 10, and in some interpretations 11 dimensions of space. 3 dimensions we move through. 1 dimension of time we feel. The rest exceedingly small and carefully concealed, wrapped into themselves. Not because they are unimportant, but because they are too subtle to reveal themselves directly. These hidden dimensions are not vague or arbitrary. They possess their own geometry with intricate structures known as Calabi-Yau spaces, many-dimensional, tightly curved forms where strings vibrate along paths guided by shape itself. Here, geometry is not merely a backdrop. It participates. The way these hidden dimensions fold determines which notes the strings are allowed to play, and thus determines the masses, charges, and forces we observe. In other words, who you are at the deepest level may depend on a shape you will never see. This idea is both daring and gentle. Daring because it stretches reality far beyond the senses. Gentle because it does not demand belief. It simply invites listening if certain things cannot yet be verified. Does that mean they cease to exist? Of course, debate does not fall silent. Many ask, how could this ever be tested when hidden dimensions are curled at the Planck scale? Every current experiment falls short. Skepticism is justified. Science lives by verification, and here the limits of our tools meet the limits of patience. Yet science also lives by orientation. Some ideas are not meant to conclude, but to keep the path open. String theory and hidden dimensions may not yet be answers, but they offer a new way of listening. Instead of asking why the universe has these numbers, we ask which geometry allows them to speak at all. Philosophy has walked this road before. Once we believed only what could be seen was real. Then we learned to trust forces, fields, relative time. Each time, reality widened quietly without ceremony. Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, in letters to a young poet, live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. Perhaps hidden dimensions are questions meant to be lived with, not solved immediately, but allowed to soften the mind in the presence of what cannot yet be grasped. Think of this in a very human way within you, too. There are hidden dimensions, unused capacities, untouched memories, rhythms that never quite found a voice. They do not disappear because you cannot see them. They fold inward, waiting for the right conditions to vibrate. And when we see the universe as a symphony of strings, silence is no longer emptiness. Silence is the ground. Upon that ground, the smallest vibrations determine the greatest harmony. Not everything needs to sound at once, only at the right place. Perhaps the final question is not how many dimensions does the universe have, but this: are we willing to live within a reality larger than our perception? Willing to accept that some things may be true even before we can touch them? Willing to rest in the space between knowing and not knowing? Tonight, you do not need to take a side in any debate. You do not need to defend or reject. You may lie still in the familiar space, noticing that even if hidden dimensions exist. This breath is enough. Gravity still holds you. Light still arrives. And if the universe is a symphony, then sleep is the resting note, where strings continue to vibrate but do not demand to be heard. In that resting note, questions do not disturb. They simply remain with you. No further conclusion is needed. Let the night continue and allow the unseen dimensions to hold you gently. And then, as this journey begins to slow, not because it has reached an end, but because there is nothing more that needs to be carried, you can allow the ideas you've just heard to dissolve very gently. You don't need to hold on to the concepts. You don't need to remember the number of dimensions of space. You don't need to fully understand the equations or the vibrating strings. They have already done their work, opening a space wide enough for the mind to rest. The universe does not ask you to keep up with it. It was moving long before questions existed, and it will continue long after every answer has settled into silence. Right now, you do not need to be an observer. You don't need to be a consciousness trying to understand. You only need to be a very small part, being supported by the familiar rhythm of reality. The slow turning of the planet, the breath becoming steady, and the quiet spreading through the night. If anything remains, let it be only a very calm feeling that you do not need to resolve the universe in order to be allowed to rest within it. Let sleep arrive like the distant light of the stars, unhurried, undemanding, quietly enough for you to feel safe and enough for you to let go.